should I talk to him? Oh my god. It's so scary. You got me. What? To do what? Do what? What do you want to do? Said something about wanting to do something. I am my body and I am the only person alive. So small to be a sewer of misery. It's kind of. Oh, okay. Definitely about to be all over the place with this one, but you know I'm coming out of BabyRatu. Started with Baby Girl, and then saw Nosferatu, and I actually really liked seeing it that way. I like that saying that's like, comfort the disturbed and disturb the comforted, and I feel like those two things happen to me in that order. I think it's windy, so let me just get somewhere safer. But I really loved so many things. Okay, I'm gonna really get into it in a second. It's a little too windy right now. Sorry, I'm just walking out of the theater and I needed to record. I have so many things I want to talk about. Like, so many quotes are so deep on like an esoteric level from that movie, and there's just like this thing alchemically that clicked so interestingly when I was watching that movie. I think so much of it is so symbolic to me, like these like alchemical, you know, symbols. Why is it scary and dark in this parking lot? But what's really fascinating is that, like, okay, I'm just gonna say a couple things to remember. Connection with Bones and all, with major Capricorn energy. A lot of the essence of consumption, you know, deep-rooted cycles, deep-rooted aspects of ourselves that, you know, are either that we continually kind of, I don't know, just things that are buried, whether or not they surface. And obviously Dracula has no, what am I talking about? Dracula has like a coffin, okay, not horns. So obviously very Capricorn, you know, coded in that way. But even the way the vampire is connected to the devil, and especially that card, the devil card, where we see the devil standing behind a couple. You know, we could presume to be a couple, a man and a woman, Adam and Eve maybe even. But there, to me, it's about how like there is a devilish thing that controls our relationships and the basis of them. And I think it's really fascinating. Baby Girl will tie into this in such a cool way in a little while. I like that I'm starting with Nosferatu because it's like fresh off the dome, you know? But in Nosferatu, at one point there's this alchemy sentence or something, and the alchemy sentence, there's a quote about alchemy, is what I'm trying to say. Wow, I don't know why I'm like losing my words. But the doctor, you know, who's kind of like that figure where it's like it's the doctor who's kind of like an alchemist, but it's in every type of like vampire Dracula content. There's like this guy. It's like he has a name, but I forget. But he's just Van Helsing, kind of that character, and he has like a lot of just like weird kind of like writings and stuff that he's looking over when we meet him in Nosferatu. I'm gonna be jumping all over the place. I hope this becomes concise. But we see him the first time talk about how his quote, black sulfur won't turn to gold today because he miscalculated or something. And I just love that tiny quote. And then another one that I really loved from that movie is if we are to tame darkness, then we must first acknowledge its existence or its presence. And that ties into Baby Girl in such a cool way. Taming, I think of a dog. Domestication is one thing, but taming, we specifically think of like a dog, I think. And in Baby Girl, one of the symbols that I think represents maybe the darkness in our main character, played by Nicole Kidman's sexuality, that aspect of her to me is represented by the black dog that the other protagonist, played by Paris Dickinson, tames. And in this really interesting way, to me, in that movie, Paris Dickinson has kind of like, okay, that movie, see, I told you all, I'll be jumping all over the place. I'm trying, okay, just to not, but it'll happen. Just, yeah. However, that movie to me, Baby Girl, has maybe way more of like an Aquarian kind of energy, where it feels like there is a lot of power and power structure at play. And I think of like the signs that are ruled by Saturn, which are Capricorn and Aquarius. Those ones to me are all about kind of, I don't know, when I think of Saturn, I think of either time, like power, when I think of like the whole Chronos, and like the old age of Saturn, or just kind of literally like evil. But it is kind of like, it's not necessarily evil, it's more this domineering force that is incomprehensible. That being said, I think in Aquarius we see the light in that, where we see someone who is able to bring about change in an incomprehensible way, in a way that connects to everybody in a deep way. I don't know how to explain that. Like, something about Aquarius to me feels like, with the air association, and, if we connect time and from Saturn and like the air being kind of like in the mind, in terms of like spheres of, bodies of a person, like these cycles in our mind, or in the collective mind, like there's things that we understand subconsciously and like deeply, and that have come from like a really long time before us, kind of like that Saturn vibe, that will come back in our mind. And these cycles exist in a way that I feel like it's almost like a helix. Like it looks like it's going in a circle from one angle, but it's actually advancing, maybe like upward, And so what I find really, 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 really fascinating is that in BabyRatu, when we talk about that black sulfur turning to gold, actually I think he says Hermes won't turn my black sulfur to gold today because he was wrong about something. And I find this connection between Hermes, sulfur and gold as ideas, to me, really represent in this beautiful way that was created by so many things that I've watched, honestly, but most explicitly by Nosferatu. This beautiful way that through kind of like our advancement intellectually, through the development of our mind, of our consciousness, the Hermes, the consciousness, literally, through the advancement, elevation of our consciousness, things that maybe are associated with kind of like the raw base. Honestly, I'm gonna put it the flattest way. With the advancement of our consciousness, we can turn something dark and violent and destructive by nature, specifically sex, that is still required to keep us kind of like alive and keep our species, kind of keep things going. Like the sulfur that is black, to me, maybe has been touched with lead, you know, there's been a poisoning of the essence of that which keeps things alive. And, you know, the essence that keeps things alive, as in like on a not on an organismal scale, but on like a population scale, the essence that keeps a population alive is sex, ultimately. And that has been tarnished kind of like in this deep way, just like because of how things happen. It's like, it's very interesting. It's almost like these things were drawn to each other. And in Nosferatu, they explore this. They talk about how kind of a woman who is sexual in this movie, I think it's very clearly, okay, I would say it like this. I think the men are very corruptible in Nosferatu. And it's very interesting. I think when our protagonist, who is played by the guy in Bridgerton, has the experience with Nosferatu that I think can be considered like a sexual trauma, where he was kind of put in a position to understand, you know, the traditionally feminine lens of sexuality and kind of the psychological, like biological mechanisms that drive like sexual submission, which maybe, just maybe, on a deep-rooted level, come from trauma from, you know, like evil. Like, I think at a certain point, before we had the consciousness to communicate, all kind of sex can be presumed to be assault. And so any submission is going to be connected to danger, violation, and just the notion that power is not in your hands, in a way that, you know, maybe the sexual aspect allows you to cope with the fear of, and still makes, you know, again, sex happen. And it's kind of, in Nosferatu, it's really interesting how the men seem really deeply, on a really complex level, tainted, in a way that they become closed off. And we see like one character return to his wife, kind of like, because he's always this character who returns to his wife who is dead, and you know, is lost in that situation. They tried to reason with him, blah blah blah, but it almost seemed like this character had been so. Honestly, misogyny ties into it really interestingly, because this like perversion of sex, like. Okay, I'll just put it like this. A character calls our, like, fallen man that I'm talking about a rutting ape, okay? And I just think to connect that character who is lost in the sauce, literally, to an animal, succumbing to instincts that can make it, like, violent and sexually, you know, crazy in a way that's joked about and accepted, to me that indicates his kind of, like, not complicity, but his, what's the word? His corruption. That's what I'm looking for. Because I just think he, on a very deeply level, is corrupted. But because of the nature of victimhood, maybe, I think is something really beautiful. When someone is not in that position of power, there's no, I just think what's really interesting is the way that power is defeated in Nosferatu is when kind of like the pull of raw sexual desire that exists within a person is finally, you know, understood by people around them. And I think the bringing this monster into sunlight and then him turning into a skeleton that was positioned like the death card, okay? To me, and the death card, again, you know, being this skeleton frolicking in a field under the day, I guess I'm just saying, to me, first of all, it was really cool that when Nosferatu died, he emulated this tarot card. I think there's a lot of tarot symbolism in general and in all that's alchemical. But also for there to have been this destructive outcome that I completely forgot was in the original movie, felt so cool to me too, where it's like it reminded me of Bones and All, where it's like, in this Capricornian way, the only way that evil can kind of like can vanish is for good to kind of accept its presence that it did not want within itself. Okay, this is very confusing, but I guess I think of it like kind of like almost like I think this happens in The Exorcist, where someone who's, or maybe like in that Bible story, like a vessel is used that the evil is kind of placed within, and in a way, I don't know. I'm losing my train of thought, but it was just so fascinating to me to see how there was this interplay between Ellen in Nosferatu and the vampire the entire time. And then when it was revealed in this way that he represented her shame, specifically, it made me feel so, like, fascinated, because I'm like, this kind of makes sense. Like, there's so many things that are evil that we do, or that people do, that are kind of like, how do I put this? There's so much evil that is allowed to roam and that isn't confronted, and that creates victims when people are put to shame for their experiences with it. And that's something so beautiful, I think, about the connection between consciousness, sex, and the gold, which is love, which is what we get to, which is, incorruptible, all this, is that there needs to be this subversion of the sexual structure, almost, by consciousness. Like a subversion of the power that exists within our sexuality, conceptually. Like, if we can subvert that power and give grace, validity, and acknowledgement to the part of us that is the reason it's there, the part of us that's creating a space for it, whether we like it or not, because of our biology, because of our instincts. Like, so much evil is sexual to any degree. I think a lot of even like abuses of power come back to sexuality for me, where it's like, I think people, whether they eroticize it or not to themselves, only really take advantage and abuse someone else out of this, to me, it always feels rapey. Like, at any level, even like a teacher is really mean to me, is not respecting my accommodations for my mental health. Like, any abuse of power has always felt sexual, or at least made me remember or feel like the person who's abusing the power. And I think this is how power propagates, unfortunately, and this is related to biology again, and where these conceptions of power come from. Before there were words, before we could conceptualize these ideas into words, there's just something when someone abuses any power of any kind, there is something innately in that makes the victim feel violated. And a lot of the times it's because for you to have someone abuse their power over you, you will feel like, a lot of the time, and I will like, this is just constant, this is everywhere. If you are in a situation where someone takes advantage of you, a lot of the time, a part of yourself will feel like you put yourself there. And then you have to examine that out of this, like, shame, again, that in your, confusion, processing, and all that work, the monster, the evil goes unchecked, because you are the one that's being questioned. And it's kind of like the Scarlet Letter, like, that priest was like a villain, like a menace, and I think. But because we put the Scarlet Letter on her, nobody even knew that he was abusing his power as a clergyman and tarnishing this holy thing that's supposed to be, the establishment of Christianity. And not to get kind of into the gold of it, I thought it was so beautiful to think of this transmutation that, you know, like comes with knowledge. You can't do any type of science without learning, without advancing your understanding. And I think when we think of gold and something that's incorruptible, perfect, beautiful, and worth more than anything else, and has a worth that will not erode with time, that cannot erode with time. I think we all think of, like, maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm being, you know, romantic, dramatic, whatever, but I think of love. Haha. But I think it is so, like, I was crying in both these movies. In Baby Girl and Nosferatu, and for similar reasons, even though I think what was really interesting is for Baby Girl to be such a kink heavy movie, I thought that one was a really beautiful examination of the way that kind of the power that literally consciousness and that love has to acknowledge evil, to be aware of evil, you know, in its entirety, and still prevail. And I think now I'm jumping, but in Baby Girl, when we see this relationship where it all starts because she's dissatisfied. I love that. I knew the first scene was going to be a sex scene. I don't know how. I swear, hand on the Bible. I was telling myself, for some reason, that the first scene was going to be a sex scene, and it was in Baby Girl. And then I also knew, for some reason, when I saw that it was a sex scene, that she was going to fake the orgasm, you know, and maybe it's kind of like implied by the marketing, fine. But I just really love that in that movie, we don't see her sexuality actually interfaced with until it's kind of like manifested physically in this form that scares her. And she even has a vision of it collapsing her to the floor, which is the black dog that we see Harris Dickinson's character, Samuel, give a cookie and tame. You know, show gentleness. It's kind of like the lion card in tarot. And like bring to a state of peace. I want to make note that the lion card and like, or not the lion card, the strength card in tarot, which has a lion on it, and the star card, which I think is more classically associated with Aquarius. I feel like the woman in both pictures is in a similar physical position, whether she's kind of exchanging or kind of coordinating the waters in the star card, or whether she's kind of taming the lion in the strength card. And I think it's so fascinating that we have this old card of a woman taming a lion in connection with all these things, because I do think we all recognize kind of the influence or the strength of female sexuality when it's really harnessed. And just like the way that can really move things for better or for worse. And just like the way that just like historically it's been a force that's kind of alienated from women, like their sexuality, almost because of its acknowledged power. And just like to put it like that, I think it was really cool that in Baby Girl, to me, you know, thinking of this black sulfur that Hermes turned to gold, there's kind of this huge fear that our protagonist, played by Nicole Kidman, I forget her name because we only heard it at the end, but our protagonist, played by Nicole Kidman, she has this huge, she feels very destabilized whenever she's in the presence of this man. And, you know, she does things that she almost tells herself out of fear, out of shame, that she does not want, but she does do them anyways. And it does, and in that way, and this is what's interesting, I don't feel like, it could feel like an abuse of power, but then that's kind of where I feel like this Aquarius, it's not as much this power that comes from, I guess what I like is that in Baby Girl, the person in power in the relationship is younger. So it doesn't feel like there's these established cycles that are indoctrinating youth and influencing them in a reductionist, or in a backwards way. But instead, it kind of feels like there's this force that is coming from the youth, coming from new ideas, coming from the resurgence of cycles, or coming from the continuation of cycles that started a long time ago, but are now coming back. Because of these new ideas, these new understandings, and in Baby Girl specifically, new understandings around female sexuality. Our main character acknowledges that, and this is a quote almost, that female masochism is not anti-feminist, basically. Our main character acknowledges and tells the husband of Nicole Kidman that, I'm sorry, he has a lot of respect for the husband, but that he has a backwards view on her sexuality that is keeping them distant. And Nicole Kidman doesn't interfere because it makes sense to her. And I think that's where these cycles of understanding come in, where it's this isn't new. This has to have been around since ancient times, because sexuality has been around since ancient times, and there has to have been this flow. But it's so beautiful to see even youth to older people bring enlightenment around the way that sex can be consciously harnessed in a non-destructive way, or at least in a controlledly destructive way, where love is highlighted more than it is obscured or tarnished. And so that's where I really love the metaphor of gold, sulfur, the dog, Nicole Kidman, and the love with her husband kind of whole thing. This is really complex, maybe. I hope it's making sense. But it does feel like this man, this magician, Harris Dickinson, kind of almost like a doctor, identified this symptom. And the symptom is the shame. It's the same thing almost in Nosferatu. It's what he really identifies in her is the shame of something that's been around since her childhood. But in Baby Girl, this symptom is picked up on. This symptom that she's not, kind of, that she has shame. He picks up on the fact that she has shame around what she desires. Kind of in a very Aquarian way, maybe, low-key. But he picks that up, Harris Dickinson, and he is almost spiritually, without thinking about it, without understanding what's happening, just kind of moving through these motions in this way that I understood as a young person, but maybe it would be hard to understand for an old person. But he just kind of moves through his motions, does his thing, is authentic to himself in this relationship that is scandalous, And in doing so, he demonstrates, and I loved that in this movie there was so much talk about play. The word play was literally just mentioned a bunch of times. And I really thought of it as this way that we examined work and play being these two kind of things that in that movie can beautifully coexist through love. And it's kind of just I guess the way that health, mentally, physically, etc., can coexist with sexuality, as I think what's kind of represented when that's kind of when we see that work, and I really loved that the consequences of her actions were completely explored. It felt like she it was really beautiful to me. It felt like she had this really raw understanding that what's keeping her distant from her husband, what's made her do something that made her so hard to look at for him for a year without him, and I love honestly that Christianity was in it, because he learned whether or not it's propaganda, I don't think they barely mentioned that it was Christianity. I love that he forgave her, and we see that in Nosferatu too, where a husband forgives his wife for these things that she's ashamed of sexually, and that have kept her and her husband from being truly connected spiritually and protected from evil in their relationship, in their golden union, this protection isn't available until really the darkness has been brought to light. And I think it's just so beautiful that I don't know, just that in both, in this way that I cried about this in both the movies. There was this essence of, I see that you've like fallen from grace, and and in both these movies it's something tied to like, this complex, whether it's within, whether it's without of them, this complex mechanism that they're just a slave to, something that's within them that, there's kind of this Saturnian thing, that this internal clock, these needs, these material needs, I don't know, just like things like that. I just think it was really cool that, wow, I'm really losing it with my train of thought. I guess I just think it's cool that, that we see, like, in this complex way that made sense when I looked at both these movies together. We see sex be really highlighted to have the capacity to hold destructive energy. And I thought of this when I was talking with my parents in between both movies, because I saw a double feature. I did a double feature, kind of. Like, I saw Baby Girl an hour before seeing Nosferatu. So, But I was telling my parents this, that I felt like a vampire, and I was excited to see if this would be explored in Nosferatu. A vampire engages only with the play aspect of life in a way that's destructive to health. It's kind of like, literally almost like a demon that makes you like okay, I don't know how to put this, like a vampiric. If the vampire was this essence that was spreading from person to person, then that kind of feels like how I understand. Wow, I really lost my train of thought with that one, because that was kind of terrible. How did I lose that? I guess I just really, really, really like to see also women have a real complex exploration of the sexual aspect, the submissive sexual aspect, and how it connects, on every level to the experience of womanhood, whether it's, accepted or not. Or maybe not womanhood, but to the experience is like biologically in with regards to our biological history. Submission is connected to to kind of like how females like in biology are kind of, I don't know how to put this. I'm being really weird. I'm dancing with my words. I guess if we look at the way animals engage in sex, I think it's a lot of rape, like sexual assault, I think it's a lot of sexual assault, but there has to be a mechanism, there has to be a reason, there has to be something that keeps, this is really evil and deep, but this is just for the species to exist. And again, this is without the presence of love, okay? With love, this doesn't have to be this way. Without the presence of love, there has to be, in one or the other, when there can't be consent through communication. Without communication, you can't have love because you can't have, these things make sense to me. Without communication, you can't have love. You have to say it. But I just think there's something really beautiful about, or not beautiful, actually, there's something really ugly about sex biologically, and the way that, and it flips from organism to organism, but usually in mammals, I think, a woman will be kind of like physically inferior in one way, at least at some point in their life, in a way that facilitates assault, so that the kind of like the propagation happens. You know, and I just mean that in a way that like, this reminds me of even like Adam and Eve, the snake and everything, and like when in Nosferatu, Ellen, played by Lily Rose Depp, is talking about her early encounters with this essence that is like the vampire, but is like really the vampire is almost like a personification, like a embodiment of an essence that already exists outside of this world. You know, it's like it was given form by her desire almost. Maybe she's a Virgo. But she kind of she understands that this force that she's been connected to forever what was I exactly saying? She's talking about this thing that's been with her forever, and she says I cannot remember. This is really embarrassing now for me. I feel like if I re-listen to this right now, I would remember. So I might have to do that. But why am I not remembering? I just know that she says something along the lines of, when she's thinking about her childhood and the vampire always being there, that she felt it like a serpent. Like she felt him like a serpent. She said like, I felt you like a serpent within me from the start, or something like that. And I think of Adam and Eve and like the way that two materialized into a mortal realm. They had to be indoctrinated into this cycle of like reproduction, which without, you know, words involves rape. Maybe not, but like to me, yes. And I think that's why consensual sex even is something so beautiful, because there is like this evolution of this consciousness that has to exist in order to get there. And I think it really represents an emanation of God's will in a way that maybe sounds blasphemous to say, but I think is a really powerful weapon against the real ways that evil permeates like in the psyche. And I think that's through sexual desire and the ways we talk about it. Like rape culture to me is literally the root of like most evils. And I think when we look at in Nosferatu how the wife, when she's being tricked or almost tricked by Nosferatu, when he tells her that her husband sold her to him for a bag of gold, and that he also had sex with her husband, the vampire tells her that, honestly, in some way or another. I really understood that. I'm sorry if you disagree with me. That happens. He says it to her. She talks about him swooning like a lily. And I'm like, these are things. He is being put into a place of shame, almost like she is, and like most women are in this era, which is a really cool part of that historical aspect. Like, okay, oh my gosh, I'll get into that too. But shame makes sex more violent by nature in general. But like literally physically the experience, if you're deprived of sex your entire life at all, it is going to be the most terrifying thing you can imagine. It is going to, like, there's something about the way puritanical religions talk about sex and fear and don't let women feel secure in wanting it, that makes the act itself a lot more scary and involve a lot more like capacity for violation, I think, in a really scary way. And so that's something also that's really beautiful to explore in the time period of Nosferatu. Oh, fuck. I need to hone in. But in either way, I just think it's really cool that that in neither of these movies the woman's sexuality is outright a flaw or a like that thing that directly makes the contact. Like, it's, I honestly saw the original Nosferatu as being a lot more confusing. This had a plot that made even original parts or parts of the original feel a lot more logical. But I just like, I really found it fascinating that her and her husband are bonded by this shame that comes out of her experience with sexuality and having to be honest in a way about that because she loves him. And I think for us to bring, I think that's what's really cool. And like alchemically, I think sunlight might be used for some of these processes. I mean, I know that can happen. You know, sunlight can be involved in chemical processes, especially involving like radicalization. I don't know where that would be relevant. Anyways, but I just think it's really cool that when that part that's hidden so deep within her, when that thing that's hidden so deep within her that she feels like is corrupting her and corrupting even her husband by being associated with her, when that thing is brought to light, it's almost like it's cleaned. And that's, I think the calcification is what's represented by the death scene of Nosferatu in Nosferatu. But the way he looks like the death card, I think it's this way that that before I think things are clean and pure, things have to be, well, okay, this is really interesting. I think in alchemy, I think there's stages, if I remember correctly, and things go from first being dark to then white and then red, I believe. And I think the red is maybe kind of like also advancement, Philosopher's Stone energy. I don't remember. Okay, I'm sorry. But I do like that after this darkness is defeated, it calcifies. And in Nosferatu, that's with the body cleaning itself up. It goes from being this grotesque thing that is so like gross because it's alive and because of all the parts of it that are, you know, kept maintained within it in this darkness, and we don't even see it for so long. But the moment this ugly thing is brought to light, or at least this thing that because of its engorgement and shadow became so ugly, when that thing is brought to light, all that we're left is with a structure that is not capable of instilling fear the same way. I think that white skeleton is, you know, there's kind of this, a white flag involves like submission, and I just think for something dark to turn white kind of represents this, you know, the pirate to a white flag change is like arg to help, like I'm sorry, and we surrender. And it kind of feels like this way that victory is demonstrated from evil. We're kind of like, instead of this darkness and absence of light, now we have, and it's not a white supremacist in my heart, I hope. Like, I try to think of these things literally. Like, this is not, the whiteness I'm talking about in no way is connected to whiteness, culturally, ethnically, whatever. But this darkness that is devoid of light is just like morphed into something that, on the contrary, is every, you know, light wave on the spectrum, which is white. Which is kind of that calcification, and I think even reminds me of like a rainbow in Noah's Ark that kind of comes after this dark time, you know, and that shows the victory, the triumph of, you know, I don't know, kind of good over evil, I guess. I think a lot of the flooding idea is to flush out this evil. And when you think of her role, Ellen, played by Lily Rose Depp in Nosferatu, she, to me, reminds me of this water, maybe, that is so powerful in what it holds, like almost like the compounds in it, okay? So let's say this water is like a mysterious acid, you know, or something, mysterious compound that's dissolved in water, and once that sulfur was fully immersed and trapped in its matrix, or in her matrix, in Ellen's matrix, in her construction, her emotional construction, her lies emotionally, her false consent, you know, which is like an emotional construction. She created this like liquid, this emotional trance that surrounded the vampire. and dissolve and forced him to remain there until he was exposed to the light, transmuted. And even though she was not recoverable and that water is tainted in some way, you know, that matrix that she is not separable from is corrupted. You know, those compounds that made up herself, her identity, the real identity of what was creating that matrix, of what was making it powerful the way it was, you know, they say that she would have been a high priestess in ancient times, you know. She's the one creating this trap for Nosferatu. And unfortunately, those parts of her that are so, you know, necessary on a spiritual level, almost like these necessary components for a chemical reaction, these parts of her that are so necessary and that maybe can be, you know, recovered by the alchemist. You know, when we look in chemistry, we can recover a lot of the chemicals that we use to purify metals or things like that. And so, if that essence of hers, her soul, you know, the composition of her, you know, of the fluid that moves her, that like chemical composition that is so unique to her, that was able to destroy evil, unfortunately, kind of like, you know, just like I think it's really interesting that she dies too, and it makes me think of that Flushing, where these two things have to go together for the love to have existed and be purified, you know, between even if she's dead, you know, and then life or in death, and even like when we look at I think this reminds me of Bones and All and the Capricornian aspect of that, where I see the end of Bones and All potentially, and I've heard other people say this, so maybe it's not my idea, honestly, but I've heard and I've been influenced by the idea that the ending of Bones and All is like, I'm like spoiling every movie I'm talking about, I'm sorry guys, but that the ending of Bones and All has basically Marin, after eating, you know, Evil Man, I think she eats Evil Man in his entirety. We know she eats his heart, so it's almost like she's committed this act, and now she has to literally, like, commit. I think it's really beautiful. She could have brought Lee to a hospital, Marin. I'm jumping, but in Bones and All, Marin could have brought Lee to a hospital, but she had already eaten the bad guy's heart. And so because of her kind of like interface with that evil thing that allowed her to eat people alive, because that had been interfaced to defeat the monster and keep their love alive until the very last moment it could. Because she had gone through that experience, that reflected this darkness that was also deep within her, that also connects to sexuality in my eyes, and that also has a unique Saturnian aspect and Capricornian aspect of, you know, devouring is Saturnian. Devouring is Capricornian to me. And I think of Earth and Saturn having one thing in common, is that they bury things within them, even if they love them. And I'm really jumping. But I think for Marin to devour Lee and then kill herself makes maybe a lot of sense to me. And it also reminds me of how in Nosferatu, like, Ellen is holding back. So if the Capricorn represents death in general, and we see in Bones and All, to me, Marin representing the essence of the Capricorn, she, you know, engulfs everybody, and for someone evil to be engulfed by death, he had to be held there. So like the bad guy in Bones and All was held in place by Lee so that the Capricorn could eat him. And so it does feel like Nosferatu, where again, it's very funny, I called Lee a Virgo, and what did I just say earlier? I said Ellen might be a Virgo. Crazy stuff. But Ellen, Virgo, potentially, just like, the Virgo that I perceive Lee from Bones and All to be, holds the evil presence close to her until her final moments, almost, up until her very final moments, just so that death can overcome both of them, and in a way allowing justice to be restored and good to triumph in a way that wouldn't be possible without that loss. And I do think we think of Virgos as a very sacrificial figure. In the worst way, we could look at Jesus as having been kind of like, maybe against Mary's will, this sacrifice. And so kind of like what she's representing as a Virgo, Mary, is this person who carries that burden, so that, the overall good and the overall sanctity of the world and the cycles that need to be maintained for the world to exist and be stable, for reality to exist, I think that's kind of this nature that we see, or this nature that Saturn embodies, beyond the evil. But like to be the time and space that has to exist for everything else that's good. And to kind of be, to give that space. It's very interesting. I just think in a lot of stories, it's really cool how time comes first. Like in Greek mythology, like time, like Kronos is the first of the people, of the gods and everything. And then all of them are born from him. And then he tries to eat them or whatever. But I just think to think of to think of this devouring force as something that set the stage and led us to where we are, to where we were able to evolve consciously, does remind me of what I connected sex in, Nosferatu 2. Sorry. Oh my god, I'm being so confusing. I just think honestly when I was watching Nosferatu, I felt like every question I could almost have, and every spiritual confusion I had, about the nature of love amongst, in the midst of sex, and how those two interface, how ultimately there does have to be a conflict at least in someone that's socialized and comes from, the biological history that we all have, because the way that we find love comes from the same maybe part of us that interfaces with desire and sex, but still this part of us that interfaces with desire and sex how do I put this? I guess that part of us that interfaces with desire and sex in and of itself is from an evil place, and without the advancement of consciousness and the recognition and, bringing to light the complexity and the intricacy of the sexual submissive force, that driving force. I think we all understand dominance in this really interesting way, and I think I liked that about Baby Girl, is that dominance is something that is so implicitly understood. The reasons for it, the ways it moves us, and the way it plays into our decisions is so highlighted and so interestingly. And I think that's what's really cool about the dynamics between just people, and how, power is thrown around in Baby Girl like a ball between dogs, or to a dog. And I just think it's really cool for that movie to have allowed this woman who's disgraced by her sexuality, who's so ashamed, and who, has brought so much pain because of her sexuality, if we're going to put it so honestly, to people around her, to her family, to her husband. I just think it's so beautiful for that shame, for that pain, for that experience that hurt everybody involved, for that to be the thing that allows her and the people around her to reach a point of connection and love that is literally incorruptible and that they've never known before. And as much as it sounds crazy, for her to be able to have an orgasm from her husband, for both of them, more for him than for her, makes their relationship so much more secure, because if he can know that for sure, and she's already, told him the truth that she hasn't had that experience, and then he can know for sure that she did under no pressure, if that can be the case and all shame is removed, then he can actually satisfy her in a way that he comes to understand is deeper than physical to him. It's spiritual. He wants to make her happy and to make her feel fulfilled. And in our society, especially when you're someone in power like a CEO, non-monogamy is not accepted. She's held to a standard. And so I think for her husband to fight that shame more than he fought against her, and to fight for love in the face of, sexual shame, I think that's one of the most powerful things that people do on a spiritual level. And I think sexual shame, again, tying into rape culture, I think sexual shame makes rape way more violent and makes it propagate in a way that is so much more systematic than it would otherwise. There's a way that people, and this is kind of what the vampire idea feeds into to me, when somebody who wants to abuse power structures for sexually perverted reasons, for example, realizes that because of the environment that shames women, shames gay people, shames whoever, because of this shameful, I guess what I'm saying is, okay, I really blew it, this thought. But I guess what I'm saying is, shame can be like the deciding factor for whether or not someone is subject to sexual abuse or sexual violence, or just, to violence that surrounds sex in any way. And I think it's so important for us to also just recognize that beyond the way that sexual shame puts us at risk of violence in ways that are, counterintuitive and go against what it wants to do. Like, I think the reason these things come out of our psyche is because the fear of the sexual shame, in this way that biologically does not help the person being programmed to feel fearful. The fear of the sexual shame programs you into a submission that biologically, I think, facilitated rape. And I just think it's so fascinating for us to look at ways that through love and through consciousness and through making someone feel understood, we can destroy shame. And ultimately, in destroying shame in the woman, in the submission, it doesn't even have to be a woman, in destroying shame in the person who was violated and made to submit by someone who was able to abuse power, I think we can really reshape conversations around consent, intimacy, and sex that will allow us to look at a character like Ellen. I just think it's so blatant in Nosferatu in such a beautiful way that when Ellen says she consents to the vampire having sex with her, we know that what she's doing out of love is not, this is like a complete mastering of her body. She is not, as much as she could be swayed until the very last moment, she is mindful of her husband and does this for love and for the greater good. And I just think it's beautiful that, in a really important way, we need to start looking at how again, and I'm just going to put it like this. This is the sentence to end all sentences about this. Sexual shame, at least in my eyes, is the necessary driving force for rape culture and for violation of submissive people, in a culture that acknowledges dominance and submission sexually. And I think if we want anybody that we care about who is submissive, again, in any way sexually, to be safe from violence and, and to feel like they have access to love despite their shame, we need to think and evolve our consciousness. And that ugly lead, that sex, can, with our mind, with that rod, turn gold, turn beautiful. Amen.